I cooked for 12 people that morning. 12 plates. 12 sets of silverware laid straight the way my mother taught me. 12 chairs pulled out just enough to look welcoming. I had been in that kitchen since 6 in the morning, brisket in the oven, potato salad chilling, cornbread cooling on the rack the way my people like it. Not because anyone asked me to. Because that is what I do. That is what I have always done. I make the space and I trust that the people I love will fill it. The signs had been there before that day. Small enough to excuse if you wanted peace badly enough. Calls not returned until hours later. Family dinners moved without anyone mentioning them to me until afterward. Levi once telling me at random that his mother said grandma needed more rest these days because I got overwhelmed easily. Tiny things. Easy things to smooth over if you were the kind of woman who preferred understanding people over confronting them. I smoothed them over. By noon, the food was ready. By 1 o'clock, the table was set. By 2, I was sitting in my good dress, at the head of that table listening to the particular silence of a house waiting for people who were not coming. The first text arrived at 2:17. My cousin Renee. Something about her back acting up. Then Darlene, car trouble. Then 2 more, almost word for word, which told me everything I needed to know about who wrote them. By 3 o'clock, I had 6 excuses on my phone and 0 people at my door. I read each one and set my phone face down on the table and sat with my hands folded the way I sit in church when the sermon is saying something I already know. Then Jocelle's text came. My son, my only child, not a call, a text. 6 words, sorry mom, Essie doesn't feel comfortable. I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, because I wanted to make sure I was remembering it correctly. Every word of it. I set the phone down again. I picked up my fork, and I ate my birthday dinner alone at a table set for 12 in a house in Houston, Texas, that had never once felt this quiet. I am Massey Dunmore. I am 65 years old today. I have spent most of those years being the kind of woman people count on. The one who shows up, who remembers, who holds things together without being asked. Whatever time it is where you are watching from, stay with me for this one. Because what I am about to tell you, I have been carrying for 6 years, and I have never spoken a word of it to a single soul. Not yet. That evening, I was still sitting in the same chair when my phone lit up. Essie's name. Not a call, a post. Public. Tagged. Her account, the one she keeps wide open for the world to see. I clicked it before I understood what I was looking at. My family. Every single one of them. Renee with her bad back. Darlene with her broken down car. Cousins. Aunts. All of them on a cruise deck somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico. Dressed up. Drinks raised, laughing at something I would never know. I looked at the timestamp. They had already been on that boat when the first excuse text hit my phone. The gathering was never canceled. There was never any gathering. There was a cruise, and I was never meant to know about it. I sat with that for a long time. Then I got up, cleared the plates, washed every dish, dried my hands, and walked to the hallway cabinet, 3rd drawer, back left corner, where I have kept something for 6 years that nobody in that photograph knows exists. I opened the drawer. The envelope was exactly where I left it. I took it out, read the document inside one final time. Then I wrote one name on the front in my own handwriting, Essie. I set it on the kitchen counter and turned off the light. Tomorrow, I said to no one. I have been patient long enough. I did not go to her house that morning. I woke up before 5, the way I always do, and I made my coffee and I sat at the same kitchen counter where that envelope was waiting. Some people would have been in the car before sunrise. I understood that impulse. But a woman who has waited 6 years knows that one more morning of stillness is not weakness. It is precision. I was not going to rush what I had spent 6 years surviving. I sat with my coffee and I let myself go back. 6 years ago, Jocelyn and Essie had been married 14 months when I heard it. I had stopped by their house unannounced. Something did in those days without a second thought. Because the door was always open, and I was always welcome. Essie was in the back of the house, voice low, speaking into her phone with a softness that had no business being in her voice at that hour on a Tuesday afternoon. I did not hear the name clearly. I did not need to. I knew that register. I had been a woman long enough to know exactly what that tone meant and who it was not meant for. I left without announcing myself. I drove home. And I sat with what I had heard until it hardened from suspicion into something I could not unfeel. When I confronted her, she cried. She was 7 months pregnant, and she cried the way women cry when they have been caught, but still believe they can manage the damage. One mistake, she said. A terrible lapse. It meant nothing. It was over. She held her stomach while she said it, and looked at me with eyes asking me to be the kind of woman who absorbs things quietly. She had read me correctly. That was the part that still sits with me. What she did not know was that I had already ordered the kit, not because I wanted revenge, because I could not sleep, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son talking to that unborn baby like his whole future already lived inside that child. Josel had wanted to be a father from the time he was young enough to carry toy trucks around my living room. After Essie's first miscarriage 2 years earlier, I watched him sit in his car one night, thinking nobody could see him and cry hard enough. He had to grip the steering wheel with both hands. That was the son I was thinking about when I ordered the test. It was not some court thing, not official evidence. Just one of those consumer kits people order quietly and regret ordering later. I already had access to Josel's sample without him knowing. A toothbrush from the bathroom at my house after he stayed over one weekend, helping me replace a water heater. Even sealing that box felt wrong while I was doing it. 3 days after Levi came home, Essie handed him to me in that exhausted, grateful way of a new mother who needs 30 seconds of empty arms. I had been gentle, deliberate. The swab was in my coat pocket, and I had practiced the motion enough times that it took less than 4 seconds. My hands shook afterward, not from fear of getting caught, from the understanding that if I was right, nothing in my son's life would ever sit the same again. Levi was 11 days old when I sealed that envelope and mailed it under my own name. He was not yet a month old when the result came back on a Tuesday morning, and I read it alone at this same counter. Not Josel's son. I sat with that for a long time. Long enough that the coffee beside me went cold untouched. Then I put the document in an envelope and placed it in the drawer, and I made a decision. Josel had already built his whole world around that child. I watched my son become a father with everything he had. Midnight feedings, doctor appointments, falling asleep with the baby against his chest because he did not trust himself to put him down yet. And part of me still believed maybe whatever happened between Essie and that man had ended before Levi was even born. Maybe silence would let the damage stop with me. I could not be the one to destroy that. Not over something he did not cause and could not undo. So I said nothing. I watched. I kept the document. And every few months, I took it back out and asked myself whether silence was still mercy or whether it had started becoming cowardice. I never fully knew the answer. For 14 months, Essie was careful with me. Grateful, even. Then something shifted. She realized my silence was not temporary. It was a wall I had built to protect my son, and she was standing safely behind it. Gratitude became strategy. Within a year, she was reframing me to anyone who would listen. Difficult, paranoid, unwelcome. The birthday was not cruelty. It was the finish line of a campaign. I picked up my phone and called Josel. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I left no message. I put on my coat, picked up the envelope, and got in my car. I pulled up to their house at 10:45 in the morning. Josel left for work at 7:30 every weekday. I knew his schedule the way mothers know things. Not because I tracked him, but because I had been paying attention to my son's life for 41 years. 10:45 was safe. What needed to happen in that house first did not need a witness. Essie answered the door in 30 seconds. She had been home. The pause before she opened it told me she had looked through the peephole and made a decision about whether to answer. She chose to answer. That was her first mistake of the morning. Her face did something interesting when she saw me. There was a flicker, fast, almost invisible, before the social smile arranged itself into place. That flicker was calculation. How much does she know? What does she want? How do I manage this? All of it crossed her face in under a second, and then disappeared behind a pleasantness that might have fooled someone who had not spent 6 years studying her. I was not that someone. She said good morning. I said I needed to come in. She stepped aside. We sat across from each other at her own dining table. The table I had helped Josel pick out 3 years ago at a furniture store on the southwest side. I placed the envelope between us, face up, her name written on the front in my handwriting. I folded my hands and I said nothing. She stared at it. The silence did what I needed it to do. After a long moment, she asked what it was. I told her she already knew what it was. Her composure cracked slightly, not all the way, just enough for me to see the fear moving underneath it. Then something happened that I noted carefully. Before her eyes came back to me, they went to her phone on the counter. Just for a second. Just long enough. She was already calculating her next move. I filed that away. She tried to redirect. Why now, she said. What did I want? They could talk about this, work something out. There was no reason to. I stopped her with 3 words. You pushed me. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain myself. The birthday dinner sat in those 3 words. The coordinated excuses sat in them. The cruise photos with the timestamp that told me everything. The 12 months of manufactured distance. She pushed, and now we were here, and there was nothing left to negotiate. Her mouth closed. The front door opened at 11:20. Josel stood in the doorway with his work badge in his hand. He told me later he had driven back during his lunch break after realizing he had left it on the nightstand. He looked at me. He looked at Essie. He looked at the envelope on the table between us with her name written on the front. The air in that room had a weight to it that a person walks into and immediately understands something is wrong. He asked what was going on. Neither of us spoke. Essie picked up the envelope. I watched her hands. They were not steady. Josel asked again, and his voice had dropped into that register's men use when they already know the answer is going to cost them something. Essie opened the envelope. She read the first line. And she went completely still, not the stillness of shock, but the stillness of a person whose ground has just disappeared. Josel crossed the room in 4 steps and took the document from her hands. I watched my son read. I have known that face since the moment it came into the world. Every version of it, every age, every expression it has ever made. I have watched it laugh and grieve and concentrate and sleep. What moved across it now was something I had never seen before and hoped to never see again. Confusion first. Genuine, blinking confusion, the kind that comes before the mind catches up to what the eyes are reading. Then a stillness, deep and total, the kind that does not mean nothing is happening. It means everything is happening at once, and the body has gone quiet to make room for it. He looked up at me. How long? He said. 6 years. He sat down, not dramatically. His legs simply decided they were done holding him, and he sat. He read the document again from the top. When he finished the second time, he set it on the table and looked at it the way a person looks at something they cannot make disappear by looking away. He's not mine, he said. No, I said. He is not. He already knew that. The document had said it plainly. What he was doing was making his mouth form the words, because some part of him needed to hear them in his own voice, before he could move to the next question. I understood that. I waited. Who? He said. I told him I knew. I told him I needed him to hear that answer from Essie. That was when Essie reached for the narrative. She started with the word Josel. His name, soft like an opening, like she was about to offer him something manageable. She was going to sequence this, feed him the version she had already constructed. I could see the architecture of it in the half-second before she spoke. Josel stopped her with one word. Don't. Not loud. Not angry in the way people expect anger to sound. It was quieter than that, and it landed harder because of it. He was not confused anymore. I watched the last of the confusion leave his face, and what replaced it was a clarity that had no softness in it. He turned back to Essie and asked her directly who the biological father was. She deflected, reached for something about timing and stress and how complicated everything had been. He let her finish. Then he looked at me. I told him I believed he already knew the answer if he allowed himself to think about it. I watched something move behind his eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. The specific expression of a man who has just been given permission to look at something he had been keeping carefully out of his own sight. I picked up my bag. I told him I would be at home when he was ready. I looked at Essie one final time. Not with satisfaction, not with cruelty. What I felt looking at her in that moment was closer to exhaustion. 6 years of carrying something that was never mine to carry. I had set it down now. What happened next but belonged to them. I walked out. I sat in my car at the curb and I did not start the engine immediately. Through the closed front door I heard it. Not words, just sound. The specific sound of a question being asked and answered in a room where both people already knew what the answer was going to be. A sound I cannot describe and will not try to. I started the car. My hands were completely steady. He did not come that same afternoon. That part matters. People think revelations move fast because movies train them to believe human beings reach clarity immediately. They do not. Real people leave houses and sit in parking lots. They drive nowhere for an hour. They stare at steering wheels and replay conversations, trying to locate the exact moment their life stopped being the thing they thought it was. Joselle came to me the following evening at 3:47. I had been sitting in the same chair since lunch, the chair at the head of the table where I had eaten my birthday dinner alone 3 nights earlier. I had changed clothes at some point, but not the feeling inside the house. That stayed exactly where it was. I knew he would come eventually. I just did not know what version of him would walk through that door, angry or broken or both. He was both. He did not sit down. He stood in the middle of my kitchen and told me what 6 years of silence had cost him. Not loudly. Joselle has never been a loud man, but the quiet of it made every word land harder. He said I had let him build his whole life around a lie. He said he had changed that boy's diapers and taught him to walk and sat beside him through fevers and nightmares and preschool orientation, and called himself a father every single day for 6 years, while I stood there knowing something he did not. He said the word knowing like it had edges, and he looked at me while he said it. He did not look away. I did not defend myself. I did not reach for explanation or softness or anything designed to make that moment easier for me to survive. His anger belonged to him. I had earned every syllable of it, and I received it the way you receive something you have owed for a very long time. You do not flinch. You let it land. When he was done, he told me as he had confirmed the name. Eldrin Pruett, his boss. I watched something reorganize behind Joselle's eyes when he said it aloud in my kitchen. 6 years of Monday mornings, performance reviews, corporate dinners, handshakes across conference tables. The man who smiled at him in meetings and approved vacation requests and signed evaluations. All of it running backward through his mind at once. His professional life and personal life collapsing into the same wound. He said the name once more under his breath and then went quiet. I understood that quiet. That was not the silence of a man with nothing left to say. That was the silence of a man recalculating every memory he owned. I told him the truth, not as defense, as truth. I told him I held that baby when he was 3 days old and made a decision I believed would protect my son from destruction he did not deserve. I told him it cost me something every single day afterward. Sleep, peace, clarity. Time with him I could feel slipping gradually away even before I understood why. I told him I was wrong, not in loving him, not in wanting to protect him, but in believing silence was something a person could control forever once other people started building their own plans around it. I told him I never anticipated Essie turning my silence into a weapon against me. I did not foresee being slowly removed from my own son's life while protecting the very marriage doing the removing. Then I apologized. Fully, without qualification or condition. I told him he had a right to know his own life, and I took that right from him. There is no version of that that becomes acceptable because my intentions were loving. He needed to hear me say that plainly, so I said it plainly. He was quiet a long time after that. Then he asked one question. Does Eldrin know about the test? No, I said. He stood up slowly. I asked him what he was going to do. He picked up his keys and looked at me with something I had never seen on his face before. Not rage. Resolution. I'm going to work tomorrow morning. The way he said it told me everything. I was not there when it happened. What I know about that Monday morning I know from Joselle. From what he told me that evening, sitting at my kitchen table with his hands flat on the surface the way he sits when he is organizing something difficult into words. I know some of it from what followed in the days after. I am telling it to you the way it came to me, in pieces that assembled themselves into a picture I could not look away from. Joselle did not stop at his desk. He walked straight to Eldrin Pruett's office, closed the door behind him, and placed a copy of the document on the desk between them. He did not speak first. He let Eldrin read it. Eldrin's response was immediate, controlled. He told Joselle this was a misunderstanding, that Essie was emotionally unstable and had manufactured confusion around the situation, that a privately collected DNA test was not admissible, not reliable, not something any serious person would act on without court verification. He said all of it with the specific confidence of a man who had spent years in rooms where confidence alone was often enough to redirect a conversation. Joselle let him finish. Then he told Eldrin that HR would be receiving a formal workplace complaint before the end of the business day regarding the nature of his relationship with an employee's spouse and the professional environment that relationship may have compromised over multiple years. May have. That wording mattered. Josel's attorney had already advised him not to walk into HR making declarations he could not yet legally prove in court. He was reporting conduct and possible conflict exposure, not prosecuting a case in the hallway of an office building. Then he picked up his copy of the document, stood up, and left the office. By noon, the complaint had been formally filed. By late afternoon, HR contacted Josel confirming receipt and informing him the matter would be referred for preliminary internal review involving compliance and outside counsel. No promises. No dramatic reactions. Corporate language designed to reveal as little as possible while protecting the company from future exposure. They did not suspend Eldrin. They did not accuse him of anything directly. What they did do was begin asking careful questions about reporting structures, travel reimbursements, supervisory boundaries, and whether any personal relationship may have overlapped with professional authority inside the company. Quiet questions. The kind that matter more than loud ones in corporate buildings. Houston's corporate sector does not absorb this kind of allegation casually. A senior figure, potentially involved in a long-term personal relationship, connected to the household of an employee under his supervision, creates the kind of liability companies move slowly and carefully around once documentation enters the room. By the end of that Monday, Eldrin's position inside the company was no longer as stable as it had been that morning. I learned all of this at 7 that evening. What I learned on my own came earlier. At 11:43 that morning, my phone showed Essie's name. I did not answer. She left a voicemail, and I listened to it once standing in my kitchen very still. The crying was gone. The voice on that recording was measured and deliberate. The voice of a woman who had already made calls, already spoken to somebody who explained what needed to happen next. She informed me she had retained an attorney. Less than 24 hours. I stood there thinking about her living room, the envelope on the table, the way her eyes moved toward her phone before they moved back to me. I had noticed it then and filed it away. I understood it now completely. Essie had not panicked and rushed to find legal help. She had activated a plan she already knew existed. The speed was not fear, it was preparation. Maybe not preparation for this exact day, but preparation for the possibility that eventually the version of events she built her life on might stop holding. That realization settled into me cold and clear. Then my phone rang again. Different name. My cousin Renee, the one whose back had apparently recovered enough to survive a cruise ship staircase and a margarita menu. She asked me if what she was hearing was true. I sat down, kept my voice even. What exactly have you heard? I asked, and I listened to every word. A community does not break all at once. It happens in phone calls, text threads that split into separate conversations. People who were in the same room last week suddenly receiving different versions of the same story and choosing which one fits what they already believed. By Tuesday morning, my phone had rung 11 times. By Wednesday, I had stopped counting. I answered every call. What I did not give was warmth. I gave facts, sequenced, precise, without editorial. I told each person what happened in the order it happened, and I let the silence after do its own work. Some of them filled that silence with sympathy. Some filled it with questions that were really accusations wearing a gentler face. A few said nothing at all for long enough that I knew they had already chosen their position before they dialed. I noted all of it. I did not correct anyone's assumptions about what my temperature meant. Several of them decided I was in shock. I let them keep that. I was not in shock. I was taking inventory. The family fractured along lines I had already mapped. Some moved toward Essie. She was Levi's mother. The marriage was collapsing. There was a child caught in the middle, and sympathy flows toward children naturally. I understood that. Some turned toward me and brought their questions like weapons. Why 6 years? What was my real motive? How could I watch Josel love that boy without telling him? I received those questions the same way I received everything that week. Steadily, without flinching. Josel called me Wednesday afternoon. Essie's attorney had contacted his lawyer, challenging the admissibility of the private DNA test and questioning how the sample had been obtained. I told him to write down exactly what I was about to say. I told him I had expected that challenge from the moment I sealed that envelope 6 years ago. A privately collected sample was always going to be contested. I knew that when I ordered the kit, The private test was never the instrument. It was the door that brought us to this room. The court-ordered test is the instrument. It will tell the court what the private test suggested. That distinction mattered legally, and his attorney already understood it. His attorney needed to file for court-ordered paternity testing immediately. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he understood. That evening, my phone rang again. My cousin Darlene, the one with the car trouble that had somehow not prevented her from boarding a ship. She had something to tell me, and I could hear the discomfort in her voice before she found the words. 8 months ago, at a family gathering, Essie had pulled her aside, quietly, with what Darlene described as genuine concern in her voice. Essie had told her she was worried about me, that I had been saying things that didn't track. Getting confused. Becoming difficult to reason with. She had said the way you say something you wish wasn't true. Then Darlene admitted something else. At the time, she had not fully believed Essie, but she had noticed smaller things afterward that made the story easier to accept. Me repeating myself once during Thanksgiving. Forgetting a grocery item Patricia asked me to bring to a cookout. Tiny, ordinary aging moments. Nothing serious, but enough that once Essie framed them a certain way, people started quietly fitting other harmless moments into the same picture. That part mattered to me. Not because it hurt, because it explained how carefully this had been built. I sat with that for a moment. 8 months ago, 4 months before the birthday, Essie had been planting that seed while I was still saying nothing, still protecting her marriage, still carrying her secret in my own body. If I had ever spoken about anything, the ground was already prepared. Massey is confused. Massey is paranoid. Don't listen to Massey. I did not feel anger. I felt the specific cold clarity of a woman who now understood exactly the scale of what she had been dealing with. I called my sister-in-law, Patricia, retired school teacher, 51 years in this community. When Patricia speaks, people listen. I told her everything in sequence. No emotion, no request for sympathy, just the facts laid out in order. I let her draw her own conclusions. She drew them. 2 hours later, Josel called back. Essie had filed for divorce, full custody of Levi, child support, and her attorney was arguing Josel had no legal standing to contest custody because he was not the biological father. I was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Get a good attorney, I told him. I know someone. I had been rescheduling that appointment for 3 months, not because I was afraid of what they would find, because there had been no one to go with me, and I had gotten used to postponing things that required me to sit alone in a room and feel the full weight of that. But the week after the family fracture, I called and kept the appointment. I drove myself to the medical center on a Thursday morning, and I sat in that waiting room, and I watched other people come in with somebody beside them. A husband, a daughter, a friend who had taken the morning off. I sat with my purse in my lap and my hands folded, and I waited for my name. The doctor did not soften what he found. I respected that. My blood pressure reading was high enough to require immediate medication adjustment. Numbers he wrote down and showed me without editorializing, though the look that accompanied them said enough. Beyond that, he noted early cardiac stress indicators, not a crisis. His word was concerning. He said the body keeps its own records, and what he was reading in mine told him I had been under sustained and significant stress for an extended period. He asked me if anything had changed recently. I told him things had actually just begun to change. He nodded and wrote the new prescription. I scheduled the follow-up, filled the prescription at the pharmacy on Alameda, 2 blocks from my house, drove home, put the medication on the counter next to my coffee maker where I would not forget it, and I sat down. What the doctor's words did, once I was alone with them, was give a name to something I had been feeling in my bones for over a year. Before Essie's campaign, there had been texture to my weeks. Sunday dinners, Josel appearing on a Tuesday because he was in the neighborhood, Levi's voice asking me questions from my kitchen floor while I cooked. All of it had been removed so gradually that I had almost convinced myself the emptiness was something I had chosen. It was not something I had chosen. It had been constructed around me, piece by piece, by a woman who understood that an isolated person is a manageable person. My body had been keeping the record of that, even when my mind had to endure it without complaint. 2 days later, Josel walked into that same pharmacy. He was picking up something minor. He told me afterward he had not even thought about which pharmacy he chose. The woman behind the counter has known our family for 11 years. She asked him to pass along her good wishes and said she hoped the new prescription was helping his mother. Joselle asked what prescription. She understood her mistake immediately and said nothing further. He came straight to my house. Did not call. Did not knock long. We sat in my living room, and for the first time since the envelope there was no residue of anger in the space between us. He did not apologize again. He just sat. After a while, he said it quietly and without accusation. The timeline of my health decline mapped directly onto the period when Essie had cut off his access to me. He said it like a man who had just understood that what was done to his mother was not limited to one humiliating birthday. It had been ongoing, physical, measurable. He did not have a word for what that made it. I could see him searching for one. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. Unknown number. A text, not a call. I read it once and felt something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. I told Joselle I needed to make a call in private. The name attached to that number was Dorothea Pruett. I told Joselle I needed the kitchen. He looked at me for a moment, at the phone in my hand, at whatever was on my face, and he nodded and stayed where he was. I closed the kitchen door behind me and stood at the counter where I had set that envelope 2 days before, and I called the number back. She answered on the second ring. Mrs. Dunmore. Her voice was composed in the way of a woman who had been preparing for this call since she dialed. Controlled. Careful. But underneath the control, there was something fraying, and I could hear exactly where the edges were. I told her to say what she needed to say. Dorothea Pruett told me the HR review had made it impossible for her to continue not knowing. Eldrin's name was now attached to a formal workplace complaint, and outside counsel had already contacted their household, requesting preservation of certain financial and communication records connected to potential future proceedings, not accusations. Preservation, the kind corporations request when they are trying to understand exposure before deciding what becomes a legal problem and what stays an internal one. She said she had been living inside a version of her marriage that no longer matched the available facts, and she needed to understand what was actually standing in before someone else explained it to her publicly. She had found my number through the same network that had been circulating this story quietly through Houston for days. She chose to call me directly, rather than receive pieces of the situation secondhand, through gossip and partial loyalties. I respected that decision even while giving nothing away. She told me she had known about Eldrin's character for years. Not this specifically. His character. She described the shift she noticed around the time Essie became pregnant. Late meetings that multiplied suddenly, guarded phone habits, the particular emotional withdrawal of a man who had moved part of himself somewhere else. She said she recognized the pattern because she had ignored earlier versions of it before. Smaller ones. Survivable ones. She admitted something then that I respected more than self-pity. She said she had chosen not to pull too hard on certain threads because she understood exactly how much of her life might come apart if she did. Then she told me what she actually had. Not some dramatic secret file assembled overnight. Fragments collected over years. Because once suspicion enters a marriage, people begin keeping things without admitting to themselves why they are keeping them. Phone bills she stopped throwing away. A few reimbursement records she once questioned and later forgot about. Screenshots of call logs taken during periods when Eldrin's behavior shifted noticeably. Nothing that independently proved an affair. That part mattered to her, and she said it clearly. But together, the records formed a pattern stretching back years. Repeated contact between Eldrin's personal number and a line once attached to an apartment Essie lived in before marrying Joselle. She told me she only fully assembled the timeline after the HR matter surfaced, because until then, she had never forced herself to place all the pieces side by side at once. I listened without interrupting. Then I told her plainly, I stayed silent for 6 years to protect my son. She stayed silent for years to protect the life she built around herself. I told her those said the same thing, and I needed her to understand that distinction before we went any further. She was quiet long enough I thought the call had dropped. Then she said she understood. She said one more thing before ending the call. The contact pattern did not begin where Essie claimed it began. Based on what Dorothea could piece together, The communication between Essie and Eldrin stretched back at least 4 years before Levi was born, maybe longer. She could not prove the beginning with certainty, but she was certain it did not start when Et said it did. I stood very still. Levi was 6. Joselle and Essie had been married 9 years. 4 years before Levi meant the connection began before the engagement. Essie had sat across from me with a newborn in her arms and constructed a confession precise enough to secure my mercy and controlled enough to protect everything that actually mattered to her. She had never told me the truth, not one word of it. I did not tell Joselle that night. He was still in my living room when I came out of the kitchen. He looked at my face and started to ask. I told him it was something I needed to sit with before I could speak on it clearly. And I needed him to trust me on that the way I was asking him to trust me on everything else. He held my eyes for a moment, then he nodded and let it go. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, and I laid the timeline out in writing the way I do when I need to see something rather than just feel it. Joselle and Essie married 9 years ago. Levi is 6. The pregnancy would have begun 7 years into the marriage. Dorothea's phone records showed contact between Essie and Eldrin beginning 4 years before Levi was born, which placed the start of their involvement 1 year before Joselle and Essie were even engaged. I sat with that for a long time. Essie had not stumbled into something during a weak moment inside a marriage. She had carried this man into the marriage with her. Every vow Joselle heard on that day was spoken by a woman who was already in contact with someone else. The confession she delivered to me 6 years ago, the tears, the trembling, the careful framing of one terrible lapse, was not a woman breaking down under the weight of guilt. It was a woman making a calculated decision about how much truth was required to secure the outcome she needed. She had given me exactly enough to make silence feel like mercy. Not one word more. By morning, I was certain. Joselle's attorney had an office off Westheimer. We sat across from her together the following afternoon. Joselle in the chair beside me, the documentation Dorothea had agreed to provide already referenced in the notes his attorney had prepared. She walked us through what the extended timeline meant for the divorce proceedings. Fraud within a marriage, sustained and documented from before the union began, carries significant weight in a Texas family court. It did not guarantee outcomes, but it substantially repositioned Joselle's standing. Essie's portrait as a woman who made one terrible mistake inside an otherwise honest marriage was no longer available to her as a narrative. The documentation would see to that. Joselle sat quietly through most of it. When the attorney finished explaining, he asked one question. He asked how Essie had sat across from his mother with a newborn child and constructed that confession so precisely. The attorney did not have an answer for that. Neither did I. Some things have no answer that satisfies. What we did learn that afternoon was that Essie's attorney had moved to accelerate the custody filing. Aware that Dorothea was now cooperating with our side, Essie's legal strategy had narrowed to its one remaining point of pressure, the argument that Joselle had no standing as a non-biological father. She was pushing harder on it. The attorney explained it plainly. That argument was Essie's last real weapon, and she was using it with everything she had left. Then Joselle's attorney told us there was a countermove, filing to establish Eldrin Pruett's biological paternity through court-ordered testing. If confirmed, it would redirect the child support question entirely and substantially weaken Essie's custody argument under Texas law. But it would place everything, every name, every date, every document, into the permanent public record. Joselle looked at me. I looked back at him, and I did not blink. That is your decision, I told him. Not mine, not this time. Joselle filed the motion on a Thursday. I was not in the courthouse when he did it. He called me afterward and told me it was done, and I sat with the weight of that word for a moment. Done. There is a specific quality to the irreversibility of a court filing that most people do not fully appreciate until they have experienced it. The moment that document enters the public record, it belongs to the record permanently. It cannot be recalled or softened or reframed. Every name in it, Joselle Dunmore, Eldrin Pruett, and the child listed only by first name, was now part of a document that any person with a reason to look could find. That was not a mistake. That was the point. Sunlight was the only thing left that Essie's carefully constructed version of events could not survive. Eldris served the following morning. His attorney responded within hours. contesting the motion, challenging the chain of custody on the original DNA test, filing for a delay on the grounds that the evidence basis was insufficient to compel testing. Every motion his attorney filed was technically competent and strategically predictable. The private test had never been presented as final proof anyway. It was supporting evidence attached to a request for court-ordered testing. The laboratory records existed. The collection timeline existed. More importantly, Texas courts had authority to order testing based on the broader dispute itself, not solely the private kit. The judge denied the delay request 4 days later and ordered the matter to proceed. What reached Eldrin first was not the court. The company expanded its preliminary internal review, while outside counsel assessed potential liabilities exposure connected to Jocel's complaint. Dorothea's documentation, phone records, reimbursement patterns she had questioned years earlier, and communication timelines overlapping company travel periods widened the review carefully. Not because anyone had proven misconduct inside the company, because corporations become cautious when personal relationships appear potentially entangled with supervisory authority and workplace decision-making. That distinction mattered. No public accusations were made inside the company, no dramatic announcements. But reviews have a way of changing how people move around a building once they begin. 2 weeks after the review formally opened, Eldrin Pruitt was placed on administrative leave, pending further findings. In Houston's corporate sector, that phrase has a meaning everyone in the building understands. People stop copying you on emails. Meetings continue without your name attached. The parking space stays empty long enough for employees to stop asking questions aloud and begin answering them quietly among themselves. 3 days after the leave announcement, Dorothea filed. Her filing was precise. It referenced the documented timeline, the financial records, and the pending court-ordered paternity proceedings as grounds for immediate asset assessment under Texas community property law. It was the work of a woman who had spent years quietly observing her own marriage before deciding exactly when she would stop protecting it. Eldrin now faced the paternity proceedings, the internal review, and a divorce filing moving forward at the same time. Not a collapse all at once, something slower and worse. Every week, another structure he depended on weakened slightly more. Through professional networks and semi-public court records, the community began receiving a different version of events than the one Essie had pre-positioned. The narrative she had spent months constructing, Massey as confused, paranoid, difficult to reason with, was being quietly dismantled not by anything I said, but by documents that carried no emotion and required no interpretation. People who had called me with accusation in their questions were calling again with different tones. I received those calls the same way I received the earlier ones. Factually, without warmth. The record was correcting itself without my assistance. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening. Essie's personal number, not her attorney. Her voice was no longer composed. She asked me why I was doing this to her. I told her quietly and without heat at all. I was not doing anything to her. I was watching what she had done finally reach the part of her life she could not control. Then I ended the call. He came on a Sunday. No call ahead, just a knock. I opened the door, and I could see immediately that he had not come for strategy or legal updates. He had come because he was carrying something, and had decided today was the day he was going to set it down. I stepped back and let him in, and I put the kettle on without asking, because some conversations need something to do with your hands while you have them. We sat at the kitchen table. He wrapped both hands around his mug, and he looked at it for a moment before he looked at me. He told me about the phone call. It was early in the marriage, the second year, he thought, maybe closer to 18 months in. They had been at home on a Saturday evening, and Essie's phone had rung, and she had taken it to the back of the house, the way people do when the call is private. He had not thought much of it in the moment. What he thought about was what happened when she came back. The name she gave him, a girlfriend, someone from work, he could not remember which, did not match the way she had been speaking when her voice carried faintly down the hallway. It did not match the 2 seconds it took her face to rearrange itself into something ordinary when she came back into the room. He had seen that rearrangement. He had cataloged it in some part of himself and then deliberately placed it somewhere he did not have to look at. He told me this without looking away. He said he had known something was not right and he had made a choice. Not a dramatic choice. The quiet kind. The kind you make in under a second without fully acknowledging to yourself that you are making it at all. He had chosen the life he had built. The marriage. The child that was coming. The version of things that allowed him to keep what he loved. He said it plainly, and without softening it into something more forgivable. He was not a man who had been entirely deceived. He was a man who had seen the edge of something and stepped back from it on purpose. I told him I knew. I told him I had watched him see it and look away, and I had understood exactly why he did it. Not because he was weak. Because he was human in the specific way that people are human when they have built something real and are terrified of what examining it too closely might cost them. I told him that fear was not a character flaw. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. I had done my own version of it. Chosen silence over disruption, protection over truth, and I had paid for that choice the same way he was paying for his. Neither of us said anything for a while after that. We did not need to. We sat together in the specific quiet of two people who have stopped performing their versions of events for each other and are simply present inside what actually happened. That quiet was worth more than every formal word we had exchanged since the envelope. It was the real thing. The rest had been necessary. This was true. After a while, he told me the court-ordered paternity test had been scheduled. Eldrin's motion to delay had been denied. He gave me the date. Then he told me Levi had asked him something during their last visit. I went still. He said Levi had asked him why he didn't come home anymore, whether it was because of something Levi did. Joselle looked at his mug. I didn't know what to tell him. I asked what he said. I told him it wasn't because of anything he did. I closed my eyes for just a moment. That was exactly right, I told him. The test had been done. Now came the waiting. Joselle told me that waiting felt different from every other kind of waiting he had done through this. Not because the result was uncertain, but because whatever the document said, something had already been permanently decided inside him that no laboratory result was going to touch. He had a scheduled visit with Levi 3 days after the test, first formalized one since the separation. Time and location arranged through attorneys. He told me he had sat in the parking lot of that visitation center for 4 minutes before he went inside because he needed to make sure his face was right before Levi saw it. I understood that. A 6-year-old reads a face the way adults read words. I was not there. What I know from Joselle, from the way he told it that evening sitting across from me, and from 41 years of knowing my son well enough to fill the spaces between what he said with what he felt. He told me Levi had been different before he was even fully inside the room, not dramatic, not crying, smaller somehow. His preschool teacher had apparently mentioned he had gotten unusually quiet during group time the previous week. Essie told Joselle he had been waking up some nights asking whether his father was still coming back home. One morning he had refused to take off Joselle's old hoodie he slept in and cried hard enough over it that Essie finally let him wear it to breakfast. None of it sounded large when said individually. Together it sounded exactly like what happens when a child feels a structure moving underneath him and does not yet have language big enough to describe the fear. During the visit, Levi tried hard to be normal, busy the way 6-year-olds are busy, moving through the afternoon with the particular energy of a child performing stability, because the adults around him have made it clear stability is needed. They played. They ate. Joselle kept his face right the entire time. It was near the end of the visit when Levi stopped moving. He was standing by the window, and he turned and looked at Joselle with the specific directness children have before they learn to soften their questions for the comfort of the people they are asking. He wanted to know if the family broke because of something he did. He asked it plainly. No tears, no dramatics. Just a 6-year-old who had been carrying that question quietly for weeks and had finally decided to set it down in front of the person he trusted most to tell him the truth. Joselle told me he got down on the floor, sat in that visitation center floor without a second thought, so his eyes were level with his son's. He told Levi directly, nothing that happened was because of anything Levi did, not one single thing. He told him that some things happen between grown people that have nothing to do with the children those grown people love. And he told Levi that whatever happened, wherever things landed, Levi would always have him. Not because a piece of paper said so. Because 6 years of every morning said so, and that did not stop. Levi nodded the way children nod when they are deciding whether to believe something fragile. Then he leaned forward and wrapped both arms around Josel's neck, so suddenly Josel almost lost his balance sitting there on the floor. After that, Levi went back to what he was doing. Josel held it together until he got back to his car. When he told me all of this, I sat very still and let it move through me the way truth moves when it has been a long time coming. I had spent 6 years protecting that bond. I had absorbed a secret that cost me sleep and health and time with my son because I believed that bond was worth protecting. Sitting across from Josel that evening and hearing what he had said on that floor, I understood that I had not been wrong about the thing that mattered most. I had been wrong about the method. The bond itself had always been real. That does not make what I did right, but it makes it mean something. My phone rang. Josel's attorney. We both looked at it. He nodded. I answered and put it on speaker. Eldrin Pruitt was confirmed as Levi's biological father. The results were now part of the official court record. Everything that followed would be public and permanent. Josel looked at me across the table and said nothing. He did not need to. Houston does not let things stay private for long. Not in the circles where professional life and personal life share the same dinner table. What happens in a family court filing on a Thursday is known in certain offices by Friday afternoon and discussed over Sunday service by people who will tell you they are only concerned. The confirmed paternity result moved through the court record and then through the city the way these things always move. Not as an explosion, but as a current. Quiet, precise, unstoppable. Eldrin Pruitt's formal separation from the company came several weeks after the court result was filed. The statement used the language companies use when they need to act without admitting directly what they are acting on. Mutual separation, restructuring, a transition that served everyone's interests. Nobody in Houston's corporate sector read it that way. A senior figure whose name appeared in family court documents establishing biological paternity of an employee's child, with a documented timeline spanning years of professional overlap involving that same employee, does not remain untouched by that level of scrutiny in any firm that understands liability exposure. The external review had stretched long enough for clients and board members to begin asking careful questions. By the time the statement was released, the decision had already been made behind closed doors. Eldrin's career in this city had changed permanently. He might work again somewhere. Men like him usually do eventually. But the version of influence and ease he once moved through in Houston was gone. Not with this attached to his name. Dorothea's divorce proceeded with the precision of a woman who had spent years quietly preparing herself emotionally before she ever prepared legally. Under Texas community property law, every asset accumulated during the marriage was now subject to assessment and negotiation. The process was not quick and it was not clean. Attorneys argued over valuations. Financial disclosures were challenged. Timelines mattered. Some matters remained unresolved for weeks at a time before moving again. But the direction of it was clear enough that even people outside the proceedings understood where it was heading. At the same time, Eldrin faced pending child support proceedings connected to Levi's confirmed biological paternity and the loss of the income level his lifestyle had depended on for years. Consequence did not hit him all at once. It arrived in layers, professional reputation first, then financial pressure, then legal exposure. Then the slow realization that none of the structures he relied on were strong enough to carry the full weight of all three together. Essie's custody argument weakened steadily after the paternity confirmation. The Texas presumed paternity statute and Josel's 6 documented years of active fatherhood gave the court a clear picture of Levi's established relationship and best interests. Her attorney continued fighting for leverage where leverage still existed. Visitation schedules, financial obligations, procedural delays. But the central argument that Josel had no standing no longer carried the force it once had. The strategy she had relied on most heavily had redirected attention toward Eldrin's legal accountability instead. Nothing was fully resolved yet, but the direction was no longer difficult to see. The family came to me in the weeks that followed. One by one, some brought food, some called first. Some appeared at my door without warning the way I used to appear at people's doors when something needed to be said in person. They brought their apologies in different containers, and I received every one of them fully and without hurrying them along. I let them speak. I thanked them for coming, and I meant it each time. I did not give them what they came for. They came for the version of me that absorbs things and smooths them over and makes it easy for everyone to move forward without sitting too long in what they chose. That woman received their excuses on my birthday and said nothing while they boarded a ship. She is not who answers the door now. I received the apology. The relationship would be earned back over time through changed behavior, not through a single conversation and a covered dish. Grace has a price now. I am 65 years old. I have time for real. I do not have time for comfortable. Essie called on a Wednesday evening. Her personal number, no attorney prefix. Her voice was not composed and it was not strategic anymore. It sounded exhausted, like someone who had spent months trying to hold together structures already collapsing underneath her. She asked me one question: whether any of it, the silence, the 6 years, the protection, had ever been real. I told her the truth. Every word of it had been real. That was exactly what made what she did with it unforgivable. Then I ended the call. Being right does not feel the way people imagine it will. I had been right about Essie from the moment I stood in that hallway and heard her voice change registers on a Tuesday afternoon 9 years ago. I had been right about what the DNA result meant, right about what her silence meant after I gave her mine, right about the campaign, right about the envelope and the timing and the attorney, and every calculation I made across 6 years of knowing something I was not supposed to know. I had been right about all of it, and what I felt sitting in my kitchen in the weeks after everything concluded was not victory. It was the specific exhaustion of a woman who has carried something heavy for a very long time and has only just set it down. The muscles do not immediately know what to do without the weight. The proceedings closed in sequence. Jocelle's parental rights to Levi were upheld. Text's presumed paternity doctrine combined with 6 years of documented active fatherhood gave the court a clear and uncomplicated picture. Levi's established relationship was with Jocelle, and the court's determination reflected that without ambiguity. Eldrin's biological paternity was formally established, and separate child support proceedings against him were opened. A financial accountability he had spent months trying to prevent and could no longer avoid. The divorce between Jocelle and Essie was finalized under Texas community property law. Dorothea's divorce from Eldrin proceeded on terms her attorney had structured carefully, and she received what the documentation entitled her to receive. Every proceeding reached its practical end. The record was complete. What I told the audience at the end of that Wednesday call was not everything Essie asked. She had asked why. After 6 years of protecting her, I had not simply let it stay buried. I told her I had given her the most expensive thing I owned: 6 years of silence. 6 years of carrying something that took my sleep, affected my health, and cost me time with my son that I will not get back. I gave all of that to protect her marriage and her child's stability and the man I love most in this world from a pain he did not deserve. She had taken that gift and used it to build a campaign designed to erase me. I told her I did not hate her. I told her I genuinely hoped she found a way to become someone Levi could look at with pride one day, because that child deserved a mother worth having, and I told her we would not speak again. Then I ended the call, and I have not picked it up since. What came after was not a moment. It was a texture. Sunday dinners with Jocelle sitting in the chair he sat in as a boy. Phone calls on Tuesday afternoons for no reason beyond the fact that he was thinking about me. Levi in my kitchen asking the questions that 6-year-olds ask, about everything, about nothing, about why the sky does a particular thing, and whether I have a favorite color, and can he have something from the refrigerator. The ordinary fabric of people who love each other moving through ordinary days. I had forgotten what that felt like. I had forgotten it was something I was allowed to have. My 3-month follow-up came on a Thursday morning. My doctor reviewed my readings and told me my blood pressure had dropped to a manageable range for the first time in over a year. He adjusted my medication dosage downward. He said my numbers were moving in the right direction, and he wanted to see me again in 90 days. I told him I would be there. I have been compliant with everything he prescribed. What I did not tell him, because it is not the kind of thing you say in a medical office, is that Levi's voice in my kitchen is doing something for me that his prescription cannot fully account for. I have observed that as fact. I am not being sentimental about it. I know something now about grace that I did not know 6 years ago. Grace given to someone who does not recognize its cost is not grace received. It is grace wasted. I do not regret the love that was behind my silence. The love was real and it was right, and I would not take it back. What I regret is the assumption, the belief that giving someone enough protection would eventually make them into someone worth protecting. Those are different regrets. They live in different parts of my body, and I have made my peace with both of them. Joseph left on a Sunday evening just before dark. Levi had been with him, and before they walked out, Levi pressed his hand flat against my kitchen window the way children do, for no reason. Just because the glass was there, and his hand was small and he wanted to leave something. I watched them pull out of the driveway. I stood in my kitchen for a long time looking at that handprint on the glass. I am 65 years old. I have been patient my whole life. And for the first time in 6 years, I am not carrying anything that does not belong to me. I turned off the kitchen light. The handprint stayed on the glass.